Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the Father Talks podcast. I am here with my special guest, and I'm going to butcher his name. He's going to correct me. Prasant Nukalapati, right?
Prasant Nukalapati.
Yeah. Listen, guys, I practiced this a couple times before the episode started. I knew I was going to butcher it. I am so sorry. So,
You're right.
Hey, welcome to the show. I am blessed and honored to have you here. We got quite a bit to talk about. Let's give you a second to kind of introduce yourself and tell everybody what it is exactly you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Michael, for having me. Again, my name is Prasant Nukalapati. I have worked with young people and their families now for over 27 years as a classroom educator, an admissions expert, somebody who's worked with families with students with special education needs, a leadership development coach for young people, as well as a career counselor. So I try to bring the experience of my work, as well as my experience as a parent, to the work that I do with young people. And most of the time, I'm starting with young people who are towards the end of high school and moving into adulthood.
Okay, outstanding. So, man, we could use a lot more of that. Okay, I know when my son was getting ready to go to college, he was just all over the place because he couldn't figure out what he wanted to do. He wasn't sure if he was ready for college, and he was 17 when he graduated. So he's young going into college.
Yeah.
So, but so far, you know what? He's doing really well. I will give him that. He's nailed down, keeping his grades up and, balancing that in sports. So I'm pretty proud. And then I've got one more getting ready to go to college next year.
Okay.
So, yeah, but my daughter's a little more organized.
Yeah. We often find that young women are a little bit more mature at the same age as their male counterparts, and so you're probably seeing a little bit of that as well.
Yeah. She's very heavily into her Japanese. So she is working. She wants to be a Japanese interpreter in that. So very interesting. Yeah, but I tried to practice with her for a little while and try to help her out. Like, not a chance. Like, daddy's got to get you some professional help because that sounds terrible. But I had to get her somebody else. Because you're practicing a language, you need somebody to work with. To become more fluent. And just practicing it in school wasn't enough.
Yeah. What I appreciate about what you just said, Michael, is that it's important as parents to know that sometimes we should get support and help. Because maybe somebody has an expertise we don't have, but also sometimes we need a break from being our child's life coach and teacher, and sometimes we just need to be a parent. And so bringing other people into the mix allows us that opportunity to focus on building a parent-child relationship that, they grow up very fast, and it's just important to have that time. So, anytime a family can find the support they need, I always encourage that.
Okay. Well, I definitely, before we finish up, I want to make sure that I get all your contact info because I want to make sure that, hey, and I know that people need the additional help. We needed it, but we managed to figure it out. Everybody won't be as fortunate. So
yeah, absolutely happy to help. And and I really want families to leave this conversation feeling hopeful and feeling like the future holds potential for their child, for them as a family. There's a lot of anxiety in the world. There's a lot of anxiety for parents of kids who are college age or trying to figure out a career or trying to figure out what comes next in their life. And there doesn't need to be. So that's really what I'm here to support with. So I'm happy to be in conversation with you.
Outstanding. So let me ask you a question. So a lot of fathers are, quietly asking themselves, like, is my kid ready? Is my kid going to be all right? Based on what you're seeing with parents and their kids today, what should fathers be worried about?
There's always something to worry about, right? So I guess I would like to maybe reframe it as what is it that parents can help their child in being hopeful about in terms of the future? And so, and it's the opposite side of the coin, right? But obviously, we do have worries as parents. We're trying to help a young person launch I think that the biggest gift that we can give young people as fathers, as parents, is giving them time to reflect and to connect with a sense of personal purpose. Because a lot of times, young people, and because they get support by their parents, parents are just going through the motions, right? They're looking around and they see other young people going in this direction. So they assume their child also needs to go in that direction. Or they see parents helping their kid in this specific way, and they feel like they need to do that. And sometimes that path is the right path to look around and see what other people are doing. And sometimes
Right.
it's much more important to know what your own internal compass is. So that is a gift that we can give young people, because young people without an internal compass and a sense of direction age into adults without a sense of direction and without that internal compass. So I would say, rather than worrying, I think this is the gift that we can give our young people, is to give them practice, time. Sometimes it involves bringing someone else in to have that conversation, because maybe our kids don't want to have it with us, but a conversation around what is your child's North Star? Like, what is it that motivates them? What is going to shape any decision that comes before them, whether it is figuring out what happens after high school, a career, moving into adulthood, making connections? All of these should come back to a clear sense of what is important to me as a young person and what is meaningful to me, and how do I go in search of that and look for support in finding that.
Okay. So the follow up to that, when would you say we as parents, when would you say we should bring somebody in like you? Should we start freshman year? Should we wait till,
It really depends. Every young person is different. Every family is different. The expectations in one family varies from family to family. I think what I would say is that I'm a big believer in planning backwards. Like, what is the goal? Right. And so sometimes we think that like college is the goal. As parents, we think like that's the end goal. And all we need to do is get our kids across that finish line and we're done as parents. And the truth of the matter is college is not a destination. College is a path towards a destination of being self-sufficient, being happy, feeling like you contribute to the world. So then you need to look where your child is in being able to do those things, right? And if your child has just like no clue about how to do that, that is, ninth grade is a perfect time to do it, right? But sometimes kids, they mature a little bit slower, and so sometimes it makes more sense in sophomore year. So the challenge of junior senior year is that the stress of the college process takes over, and so it's not the time to be on a voyage of self discovery while schools are asking you to tell them what is important to you, right? So the earlier you can do it, the better. But sometimes a young person's maturity level may not be ready for that level of self reflection. So some cases, ninth grade is a great time, but I would say at least by 10th grade, that would be a good time to be thinking about what support your child needs and in what areas, right? Because when we're talking about college, the thing that I would want to see parents helping their child with is helping them understand, for example, when they need help and how to self advocate to get it, right? I think parents can be working with their kids on like money management, right? Financial management. I think that families can be working with their kids around getting up on time and getting yourself someplace, right? Because a lot of times we are the alarm clock, right? And that is not helpful if the end goal, and we're planning backwards, is to send our kids off, whether it's to 4-year college, 2-year college, some other part of the country, to a job, all of those things.
so I'm essentially getting kids more in line, more advocating for themselves. Yeah, getting them.
I think that's probably the biggest thing. I think a lot of times, we think about college as the goal for everybody. It may not be, but getting into college is the easy part, Michael.
Yes.
Doing well and thriving there is what is actually challenging. There is
Okay.
literally a college for every child in this country, regardless of their academic profile. But getting there and thriving is really the hard work.
Okay. So, like a lot of times we'll see kids, they're undecided with what they want to do. Teens are, say, hey, I don't want to, I'm not sure what I really want to do yet. Is there something else going on there? Maybe like, maybe kids are they just afraid to make a decision?
Mm-hmm. I think that's a good question. It's a big question as well because it could be so many things, right? There's so much anxiety among the teenage crowd, just general anxiety. A lot of it we can link to like social media, different pressures that they experienced than maybe you and I experienced at their age. But sometimes I think it's because young people have never been asked to pull the car over, stop and reflect. That
Right.
they're in this car and the car is moving and they are just moving with the car, right? And so when you stop and you say, what do you want to do? That seems like the most liberating question to a young person, but often is the most terrifying because they've never really been asked that. They just go to school every day and they have 6 or 7 classes that they take, and maybe they have after school activities, and then they do it again, and then they do it again, and they do it year after year after year. And so suddenly you get to a point where like they have to make maybe one of their first big decisions, which is what school, what major, and they are entirely unequipped to have that conversation because they've never been asked. They just keep being moved along this conveyor belt.
Yes, yeah. Now I know my wife and I always tried to make sure that our kids we gave them we gave them suggestions. Say, what should I do with this? Well, here are your options. Okay. Now you need to decide for yourself, hey, what's going to be the best thing for you?
Yeah.
I have an opinion on something, but my opinion can't be the way you do everything.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
my son who just went to college, he had a hard time deciding what he wanted to do as his, what he wanted to go to school for. But this is the same kid who he makes his own doctor's appointments. I honestly, when I go with him, I honestly just sit out in the waiting room in case they need me to sign something. But now he's 18, I don't have to even do that.
Hmm.
So there's a ton of things that he can do on his own, because he's been advocating for himself for so long. But then there's like the career thing was just something he just was unsure of.
Yeah.
As a father, we have a big family, and one of the biggest things is I want to help the kids, but for other dads out there trying to figure it out, how do we help guide our kids right without putting too much pressure on them, make a rush decision?
Yeah, I mean, first, I think maybe just to pause, I do think every family's situation is different, right?
Correct.
There may be some families who have the space to be able to decide, let their child decide certain things, or are okay with their child figuring out things, and maybe not necessarily even getting a job right away as they figure this out, right? And then there are other families where there is that necessity for the child to get a job, either contribute to the family or take care of themselves. So every family is different, right? But I do think that when we're thinking about these things, we need to give our young people a framework, because I think a framework is what brings anxiety down, right? Structure brings anxiety down, right? So when I work with young people, I have a structured approach around helping them figure out their personal purpose, right? Which is the foundation for all of these questions, including what career, right? So, and part of it is being able to engage them in questions that ask them to think about what they're passionate about, but not just what they're passionate about, but what they're good at, or maybe what they want to be good at. It also asks them to think about what their personal values are, right? And it also asks them to think about what they want their contribution to be, right? Because a lot of times young people can't be something for themselves. Like they're not quite ready for that, but they can be something for somebody else. And so all of this is part of just like a structured approach to breaking down some of these things so that that process of reflection can start. And sometimes it's a question of just surfacing something a child already knows but needs help surfacing. And sometimes it's about helping a child discover, a young person discover, right? So you won't have an answer right away, but the plus is that now maybe they at least know a pathway to discover, right? They may not know the answer to that question, but they need support in figuring out what steps might help them figure out if choice A or choice B or some other choice is the right choice for them.
Right choice for them. Okay, that's fair. And again, every I understand every kid's different. Especially in their maturity and when they're ready, and that made me think. As a parent, how do we know that our kids are ready for college? And I don't mean just like simply academically, but like emotionally ready. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these are great questions because again, we make the assumption as parents in our culture that if our child has graduated high school, that they are ready for college.
Exactly.
And that is not always the case, right? So this is what I mean again about, getting into college is the easy part.
Okay.
Staying there and thriving is what is challenging. And I think the things you talked about, like emotional maturity, that is what helps young people be resilient, right? That is what helps young people figure out things when they get hard. So I think when we think about those things, the piece around independence, right? Like how independent is my child? Am I still waking them up and getting them to places, right?
Right.
Can they figure out when they need help and can they self advocate, or are they the quiet kid who just sort of waits for things to collapse and then at the end of the semester needs help sort of figuring out these things, right? I mean, I was probably that way a little bit at that age. Um, and I think there are other pieces like, can they do something? Can they do things for themselves? Like, can they do their own laundry? Like, all of these seem like such trivial things, but when you're in college and you're away from home and you don't have that support structure, and mom or dad is not doing your laundry for you, and you have to take care of these things and manage, it's a lot. It's a lot. So these are just some of the things that I talk to families about. Like, where is your child? And I think it's important that families recognize that it's not either my child is absolutely not ready or my child is absolutely ready, that most kids are on this spectrum. And where your child is on that spectrum should help you figure out the level of support that you need to support them in getting to a point of self sufficiency.
So and keep that in mind. But especially when, granted, my daughter is she's pretty self sufficient. She's a little insecure,
Mm,
but pretty self sufficient for the most part.
yeah.
Now, I think one of my biggest things too is that I try to help guide my kids, and not unintentionally steer them the wrong way.
Hmm.
Right. Because I wanted to try to be a guide, but not force them one way or another.
Hmm.
You know, So with that being said, how do we as parents, how do we avoid, we want to be a good guide, but we want to make sure that our kids are making these decisions on their own and
Hmm.
not, forcing them one way or the other, letting it truly be their own decision. How do we avoid that?
I think it requires a certain level of self reflection for us as parents. And sometimes it's very difficult to find the time and energy to be able to do that.
Right.
And I think that it's helpful for parents always to understand where um, where their child begins and where they end. You know what I mean? Like a lot of times we have this kind of like brain fuse where we talk about like, oh, we're applying to college. Well, we're not applying to college, right? Like our child is applying to college, right? Or like, oh, we got into this school. No, your child got, I mean, yes, you're there to support. So I think understanding that piece around like where your child begins and ends and where your personality begins and ends, I think it's important for parents to engage in the process of reflection about their own college process or lack of college process, because often I find that that's the number one thing that shapes how parents try to support their child is their own college process, and they are not aware of it, but like they are going to what is familiar, and what is familiar may not have been the best option then. It may not be the best option for their child because their child is different. So it requires a lot of self-reflection, and sometimes parents aren't quite sure how to do it, but again, that's a place where either like a therapist or an educational consultant or a coach can help you with that. And it doesn't mean that you have to spend endless sessions with them, but like I really want to encourage parents when they start the college process to have that conversation with somebody to think through, like again, where their child ends and where they begin in that process.
And, well, now here here's the next thing. As parents, obviously, most times, we're raising our kids in a similar way that our parents raised us. Bottom line, we all do it. We try to fix some things. We try to, edit some things, add some things, whatever, however you want to put it. But how do we avoid, you know, especially when it comes to the schooling process, how do we avoid those same missteps, that our parents made with us, because we're trying to break cycles of, hey, well, I went to school to be a doctor, or I went to school to be this, and you
Yeah.
need to follow suit. Not every kid is suited for those things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. What's the advice there? You know, First, I think as parents, we need to give ourselves grace, and
okay,
we need to lean into the fact that we are doing the best we can at any given moment. And I think a lot of times we don't. And I think that's the one like super learning that I've had in my life is that when I look back on decisions that my parents made, some of which may not have been helpful or some have made under duress, like they were also doing the best they could, right? And so we do the best we can. But again, often we are able to do a better version of that best when we get support from other people, when we're in conversation with other people, and when we're not isolated in our own thinking, right? So I think that it's really important for parents to be in conversation with other parents, which is a double-edged sword because sometimes we can start to compare ourselves to other people, right? You don't want to be isolated as a parent. You don't want to make decisions in isolation. So that's a piece. And I think it's really about for some people, like self reflection comes easily, right? Like people just engage in self reflection, and for some people, it really needs to be like a structured conversation with somebody who's skilled to be able to help you walk through that. Right. But you kind of have to know that there is that potential for there to be a problem before you go and seek help. And I think sometimes it's hard when you're a parent, you have so many responsibilities
exactly.
to do like one more thing, right? Like add one more thing to that list. But like what is it, an ounce of prevention, right? Like if you can find it now, you will be doing a lot less cleanup down the
Right. So, I mean, where were you last year, 2 years ago? Man,
road.
definitely a lot of this stuff would have really come in handy. And you know what though? I mean, we've done all right with our own kids. They all seem to get into the things that felt promising to them. Everybody's high school and college graduates. Kids. Some of one son joined the military. He did that for 7 years, and decided to come home. Now he's getting ready to go to culinary arts school with the money the military has given them. So the kids are pretty well rounded,
Hmm.
But for those, excuse me, for those parents who are at the start of this journey, for young people, well, let me rephrase that. What matters more for a young person? They're getting ready to step into adulthood. Should it be confidence or clarity of what they're getting ready, what they're stepping into?
I think clarity is something that young people work on continuously. I don't know that you ever reach like a moment of clarity, you know?
Right.
I guess what I think is most important for a young person to be thinking about is being curious. I actually think that such an important guide at that year to be curious and to be excited about something, because being excited about something gets you through difficult times. You still are going to do that thing even when things get hard, right? And being curious, I think, just engages young people in finding answers when things get hard. And so I think like being curious and being excited about something. And also thinking of this as a process, like no young person is complete by the time they're 18 years old.
Right.
Like
Oh,
they're like maybe there's some who are like a little bit more mature than others at that age, but like how many of us are complete even at our age, right? Like it's
I can tell you, when I first started college, I changed my major twice before I decided, you know what, I'm gonna get in I'm gonna, get into a bachelor's degree, in Homeland Security. And then when I started my master's, I changed that, midway through. It's like, you know what, emergency disaster management is not for me. And I started college. I started college in my 30s, so I can imagine if you're an 18, 19-year old, all the different things that you are exposed to, how many different times you're going to change your mind. Because Lord knows I was a hot mess when I was a kid.
yeah, absolutely. And I think there's so much uncertainty in the world, Michael, honestly. Like at
Right.
this point in the world, like even like a few years back, a young person had some sense that they could go to college and they could find an entry level job immediately after,
Right.
right? And we know with the advent of AI in particular, a lot of those jobs are disappearing. Like they're not there, right? So I think there's just a lot of uncertainty in the world, and that's why I come back to like families ask all the time, like. How can I make sure that my child is all right? Right. Like unfortunately, there's never a guarantee, but I do think that the young people who are curious, right, who roll with situations, who are resilient, like those are the young people that are going to be in much better situations than young people who are just kind of like, oh, I have to jump through this hoop, or I have to do this, or I have to do that. They're the ones who are going to be fine are the young people who are curious and know that the hoops change, that you might have to jump over it rather than through it. And then they're interested in learning how. I think all of that is much more helpful than assuming that our children will find clarity.
Okay. So with kids, we're hoping our kids find clarity, or we want them to be confident and all that thing. But what about those are the kids who are, well, excuse me, the kids who are feeling like directionless. As
Hmm.
a father, there was a point in time where I was worried, a little concerned about my son, you know,
Hmm.
but because he's very confident, but he just didn't have any direction. How do we guide them? Or, is that the point in time where we find, a professional such as yourself to kind of help them, kind of start finding that direction?
Yeah, I think that like folks in my position, and I think of myself as like a success coach for a young person with a
Okay.
focus on like college and career counseling. That's how I think of it, or like a purpose coach, right? I think that it's just important to give young people the tools to be successful, right? And some people will benefit from young people will benefit from having a structured approach to thinking about these things. Some young people, like it's either like maturity level or circumstance, like it's almost like they come out of the womb and they have like a sense of purpose and they know what they're supposed to do. But like most young people aren't like that, right? Most young
Right.
people are trying to figure it out along with the people next to them. And I think, again, like working with someone who has a structured approach, right? This is not just kind of like, hey, what are you passionate about? I mean, like that's such a small part of the puzzle because not everything that we're passionate about is what we're meant to do, and it's not necessarily meant to be like our focus of study or career. Sometimes we have things we're passionate about in contrast to work, right? Like, and we want that thing to just be the thing we're passionate about. But thinking through like your passion, your skills, what do you want to work on? How do you approach these things? It can feel overwhelming. And without someone with some skill in terms of scaffolding this, saying like, first, we're going to do this. This all feels overwhelming, but first, we're just going to do this. And then once you're able to do that, then maybe we're going to do this. And then we're going to do this. And then we're going to do this. And here's the thing, as a parent, we sometimes are not the right guides for our kids because we are managing our own stress about this situation that we are responsible for this young person, right? So sometimes like, we were kind of like, oh, figure it out. And then we're like, get out of my basement. You can't live there anymore. Right. So it's a little bit hard, right? So like we sometimes as parents, like we're not the right people to do this What we need is somebody who's invested in our young person, whether it's a consultant such as myself, or a coach like myself, or someone in the family. Like every child needs the equivalent. Remember the Big Brother Big Sister program, right?
Yes.
Every young person needs a big brother, big sister, right? And ideally, that person is not their parent because, and what I mean by this is they need somebody who is just literally excited about whatever they're excited about, right? And sometimes as parents, I am not excited about what my child is excited about. Not at all. Not at all. But somebody needs to be. Somebody needs to be. And that's why working with a coach, like we step in and we are excited about whatever they're excited about. We're not raising them. We're not, we're not worried about them never leaving our house, right? Like, but as coaches, we are there to be able to say, like, culinary arts, that's your jam? Okay, let's do it. Meanwhile, the parents are like, culinary arts, culinary arts. Oh my God, what are they going to do with culinary arts? But I mean, like, somebody in their life needs to be the person who is just literally excited about whatever it is that they're doing and can help them in that direction. Keeping in mind that, like, hopefully the goal is self-sufficiency, right? Hopefully the goal is not like do what you love but live with your parents forever, right? So, but these are there are so many puzzles within this larger puzzle of how to help our young people be self-sufficient that sometimes it's too exhausting for a parent. I'm going to speak from experience because I have a 23-year-old who's working through all of these things. It's too exhausting as a parent to do it on your own.
Yes. So, all right, we're definitely in a different day and age. Okay. So, like for instance, what we defined as success, 20, 30 years ago is not the same thing now. And as
Absolutely.
a father, you know, I want to guide I want to guide all my children into being successful at whatever it is they want to do.
Hmm.
Whatever, because again, the definition of success nowadays is not the same as what it was,
Yeah.
40 years ago. So
Yeah.
how do we help, you know, explain to our kids that, my success isn't, doesn't have to be yours.
Hmm.
You don't travel the same path, or you don't have to travel the path that you see everybody else doing to be successful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, I think like, it's important for a family to be clear about like what the end goal of this support is, right? But to my mind, the support that I engage in as a coach with young people, right, as a success coach with young people, is helping them become self-sufficient, helping them feel connected to the world, right? Helping them engage in like lifelong learning. So all of these things are a part of of the work that I do with young people. So I think it's important for them to have some goal that maybe even the family articulates. So like, so Michael, like if you broke it down, like you're saying, what I'm hearing you say is that like you don't necessarily have to follow this path or this path just because I did it or because you're supposed to do it. But like when you talk to your own children about this, like what is the end game? Like why are you having this conversation with them? I'm just curious.
Oh, for me, it's just I'm just saying in general for the most part. I mean, again, my son, I joined the military late in life. I just didn't have the support I needed to join prior to.
Yeah.
Now, I've gone to school, I've gotten all these degrees, and I do well for myself. But I consider myself fairly successful, in what I do. I
Yeah.
don't want my son to feel like he has to do the same thing,
Yeah.
to be successful in his own life.
Right. So can I ask you though, do you feel like the end game is him being able to take care of himself or the end game is like because again, each family is different, right? Like if you feel like you want to be able to say to your kids like you can live with us forever, right? Like the parameters of what that success might look like and what we're coaching them to might be different than if we're saying like we're here to support you. At some point, we want you to be able to do X on your own, whatever that X is.
And for us, it is for when our kids decide to go out on their own, that they can fully support themselves and live a healthy life without without so many financial struggles.
Yes.
We don't want them to to settle for, you know, and then be in a position that, you know what, I've got to work 3 jobs because, you know what, I didn't pursue what I was really passionate about, you know.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I mean, but I do think that, for example, like there are young people who don't mind working 3 jobs, right? And our
Yeah,
sense of success might be like, oh, working 3 jobs, that doesn't sound very successful, right? But like, if those 3 jobs still support their independence, right, while allowing them to do these things and maybe like be creative in different ways, you know, that could be a type of success as well. But I hear you, right? And so like the goal is, you know, we want our kids to, I think, feel, what's the right word, like feel like they can do the things that they want and that they are free of a type of stress that we associate maybe with uncertainty,
Roger. Okay. Okay.
right? But here's the thing, you know, I mean, as parents, as you know, and I know, like we can often want something for our child, but they like it's up to them ultimately. It's all up to them ultimately to make those final choices, right? And so I think, you know, it depends on like how open a parent is to like what success might look like in their lives. But if it's around financial success, we can say that to our young people, like I want you, you know, like I want to be able to support you in reaching a point where like financial stress is not what motivates the decision in your life, and these are the ways that I can help you with that. Ultimately you make the decision about how to get there. And even as a parent, right, like I am going to be able to say like I may not be able to support you in 10, 20, 30 years with this level of exploration. I can
Right.
support you now, and here's for how long I can support you and what that support will look like, whether it's like you get to live at home, you save some money. That's what I'm doing with my child, right? He lives at home, but it's on the condition that he saves money, right?
Exactly. Okay.
So that's how I'm trying to teach him financial self-resilience, you know, financial resilience. So there's no guarantee. There's never a guarantee, you know, it's because we are in charge of somebody, a young person who is their own person. But we can share what our hopes are. Ultimately, like how they sort of like rise up to meet that challenge. I think ultimately is up to them and is hard as a parent.
Yeah. Okay. So let me ask you a quick question because for those listening, what is the major difference between what you do and what a, let's say, a high school counselor does? Because
Hmm.
I know people are going to ask, like, well, isn't a high school counselor supposed to do the same thing?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, fundamentally, I think first and foremost, it's an issue of numbers, right? So that on average in the US, um, I think the average in a school is one counselor for 300 students.
Holy Christmas! Ouch!
So the issue is how much time do you have with that counselor, right?
Right.
And, you know, and a lot of times that counselor is not only attending to the emotional needs of your child, because often they're trained to be more like that type of counselor, but those counselors are often doing double duty as a college counselor.
Ooh. Okay.
So just fundamentally, we're talking about like how much time. So yes, there are counselors in schools, but how much time do they have? And you know, when a counselor has that many students, often they are invested in keeping the conveyor belt moving. And that is what I'm speaking to, right? That like too many young people feel burned out because they're just being moved along on a conveyor belt. And the next stop is college. The next stop is a career. It never ends. It never ends, right? So what coaches like myself do is we give that individual attention, and we do not use a one size fits all, right?
Okay.
And we have the time, and we have the time, and we have the attention, to have those conversations, you know, and the types of conversations we've been talking about, they're not conversations that happen once, which is often how often a student meets with their high school counselors, like once.
Yeah,
So,
I know. My kids didn't. Actually, my son talked to his college counselor quite a bit. My daughter kind of, she was like, "Hey, this is my plan,"
yeah.
but then she's still got another year of school. So, all right. So I want to give you, a minute to kind of explain the process. So if somebody wanted to reach out to you, if they felt if they're a parent in distress, not sure how to help their kid, what's the process?
Yeah, absolutely. So when a family reaches out to me, what I do is I spend a kind of like introductory period that's almost like a little bit of an intake to understand what the situation is and learn a little bit more about what the hopes or aspirations are, either for the young person or for myself. I'm sorry, for the parent. And what I try to focus on that I think is also different from counselors is this issue of personal purpose, right?
Yes.
So that is the starting point. Whether a family works with me around college counseling or alternative pathway counseling or career counseling or adulting support, I want to have a clear sense of what motivates, animates this young person, right? So that is different. That is different, like right from the get go, than from most counselors I know. And it then provides a guide to then figure out what makes sense in terms of a path forward, right? So that's why the business is called What Comes Next, because what comes next is different for every child, right? So I have that introductory conversation. If four-year college is the goal that comes up in that conversation, right? A young person says, like, I have this personal purpose. And my personal purpose, for example, is like helping people through the medical profession, right? You're not gonna do that just by volunteering, right? You need to have education, you need to have certifications, you need to have degrees. So then we look at the pathway towards that goal for that young person, right? But if someone in that process, like it's clear that their personal purpose is making people, bringing joy to people's lives by baking cakes, right? Well, that's a different process. That is a process that might go through community college or some sort of apprentice program, right? So wherever a young person is, I provide that stop and reflection moment before we do anything, right? Um, so that like they don't feel like 6 months into the process, oh my God, how did I get here? What am I doing? How, which is all too common, right? So I try to help families avoid that. So I start with that process and we figure it out. If the parent comes to me because they want some help with career counseling, which is a thing that comes up, same thing. We start with personal purpose. We start with a very structured approach and we have some conversations and that guide how we move forward in helping that young person either explore or like move towards a career. And same thing, maybe a parent, last thing, a parent might come to me, they might say like, my kid just needs some help launching. Like they are done with college, they're not quite sure about a career, but I think they're going to figure it out. But like they are like living at home and they are never leaving the house, and like they just need some help like launching. Same thing. What's your personal purpose? And how are we going to, move you from, where you are to whatever your own goal might be? So all of the goals are generated by the kids with the parents' input. So, you've been asking a lot about like, how do we make sure this is about the kids and not the parents? That's how I do it. And I'm very, very clear and very structured in that approach.
So before we close, I got one final question for you. Okay. So if a parent listening right now, okay, feels like he's already he if a parent right now feels like their child is already behind with their if a parent feels that they're already behind with their child, excuse me,
Mhm.
it's Friday. So what do you say to them?
Life's a marathon, not a sprint, right? So I say that let's get started now. Like you may feel like they're behind. They're only going to feel more behind if we don't do something about it, right? Like I am a big believer in that, like we all have to save ourselves. And as a parent, sure, maybe either you hadn't thought about these things or you're too overwhelmed as a parent with all the responsibilities that come with parenting. But now can be the starting point. Every day can be the starting point, right? Like, like every day can be a day where like you leave some of that anxiety behind and you move towards hopefulness. But you have to start, you have to take that first step. And
Right.
having someone like a coach is going to make that process move faster and be much more of the outcome that you're looking for, because that's the skill that we bring, right? It's having worked with families for 27 years. Like I have seen it all, right? I have seen every permutation of child, every permutation of parent. I have like my own lab here with my 23-year-old in my house, you know, like it's a living lab. So the things that he is thinking about, sometimes I feel that way. Even I feel that way, like, oh, we're a little late. But you know, sometimes it's also like the kid isn't quite ready, right? But they're ready for something. They might not be ready for the huge leap, but they're ready for something. So take that first step.
Run. So wow, that hey, that is. I may have to connect you with some people because I know yeah, they're struggling right now.
You know,
So
it's not uncommon, Michael. It is not uncommon, you know, and I don't want parents to be suffering in isolation because they look around and like so and so is talking about what their kid did, or like, you know, like it's so, you know, it's that double-edged sword, right? Like we should be supporting each other, and sometimes we just drive each other into isolation. So let's end
yeah,
that isolation.
hey, thank you so much for coming on the show. Listen, I will get all your contact info, so this way when our episode airs and everything, everything is in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I mean, any opportunity to help families like the ones that listen to your podcast feel hopeful and feel like, you know, the future is full of possibilities, that they can help their child feel that sense of hope and possibility. I am happy to be part of that conversation. Thanks so much.